Rich kid caught by security trying to steal chocolate. When they found out the reason, this happened. Before the story begins, comment below which city you're watching the video from. We love getting to know our viewers. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more exciting stories. Enjoy the story and see you soon. It was an ordinary morning, but everything changed the moment little Lucas, at just 10 years old, was caught in the supermarket trying to steal a chocolate bar. The security guard, a man with a stern appearance, grabbed him firmly, and what seemed like a childish mistake quickly turned into a scandal that shook the whole town. The commotion was huge, but no one was prepared for what came next. When Lucas's name was revealed, even the most seasoned people in the town were stunned. He wasn't just a mischievous boy, he was the son of Donato, the wealthiest and most influential man in the region, owner of businesses, properties, and respect. How could such a privileged boy, surrounded by everything, be capable of committing such a simple theft? Lucas trembled, not from fear of the security guard, but from the tension of being discovered. The moment the chocolate was found hidden in his jacket, his eyes met the man's. The security guard, a veteran in town, nodded, signaling that Lucas should go to the manager's office. Lucas knew what that meant, and even though it was too late, a thread of hope still made him believe it was all just a big mistake. However, when the manager arrived, the situation grew even more serious. Within minutes, the phone was passed to the police station. News quickly spread through the supermarket. A boy so young, from the Donato family. This made people look at the incident with a mixture of shock and curiosity. Some whispered, others stared in disbelief. How did he end up there? What was going through Lucas's mind? And why, of all people, was he doing this? As the situation escalated, a whirlwind of thoughts and possibilities arose in the minds of the police officers. What could a child want with a simple chocolate bar in a town where luxury seemed to be within everyone's reach? Soon, the police station was notified. 2 officers entered the supermarket, imposing, and the tension mounted. Everyone knew that Lucas's name would change everything. The investigation seemed inevitable, but what no one knew yet was that this story, simple at first glance, was just beginning to reveal much deeper layers than anyone had imagined. "You better explain to me what happened, Lucas," said the officer, trying to ease the situation with a friendly tone. But the boy was pale and his words came out in stutters, barely audible. He didn't know how to explain. No one knew. As Lucas felt the weight of the officer's gaze on him in the town, the first questions began to arise. Why would Lucas, son of Donato, be so desperate as to steal? What was behind that small act? Those who knew Donato knew he wasn't exactly a man of many feelings, but no one could believe that his own son, the one who should have everything, had gone astray in such a simple way. The police then decided to act quickly. One of the more experienced investigators had an idea. If the boy was really Donato's son, the situation required more attention than just a simple theft. He wasn't just any boy. He was Lucas Donato. They needed to understand what was behind that act, and more importantly, what was going on inside Donato's house. Something wasn't right. Meanwhile, in Donato's mansion, a strange silence hung in the air. Helena, his wife, was sitting in the living room reading a newspaper, completely unaware of what was happening. The phone rang. Upon hearing what had happened, she showed no surprise. On the contrary, she even seemed relieved. She knew something like this could happen one day. Helena's disinterest was almost as disturbing as Lucas's act itself. To her, that small incident was just another proof that her son had never been loved, that he had never had value to them. The phone was passed to Donato, who was in a meeting with investors. When he heard the news, the businessman fell silent for a few seconds. The mansion, which had always been the stage for his authority, now felt like a prison. He knew that, at some point, His son would reveal himself to be flawed, weak, and perhaps even dangerous. However, amidst all this, the businessman didn't feel guilty. The idea that Lucas could be a disgrace to the family bothered him, but he didn't know how to handle it. Donato ordered his lawyers to contact the police immediately. He knew that an incident like this could be easily resolved or turned into something bigger, something that could destroy the control he had over everything. But in those moments, while Lucas was being interrogated, he had no idea what was about to be revealed. And so, while the town began to make assumptions, the boy who seemed to have it all now found himself alone. A simple action, a stolen chocolate, was about to trigger a series of events that deep down had been written a long time ago. Lucas's secret and the mystery of his true life inside that mansion were about to come to light. And the most surprising thing of all, maybe the blame wasn't just on Lucas. The sun was setting when the first investigators arrived at Donato's mansion. The house, an imposing structure of marble and glass, seemed as cold as the attitude of its inhabitants. They were greeted by servants who seemed to know exactly what to do, but no one appeared genuinely surprised by the situation. In fact, the impression the officers had upon entering was that this place wasn't just a mansion. It was a mausoleum of coldness and detachment, where feelings were a rarity. While the investigators spoke with the servants, the tension in the air grew. The residents of the house knew something was about to happen, but no one dared to intervene. The biggest surprise of all, however, was Donato's absence. He was in one of his important meetings, as always, leaving everything for others to deal with. His world was far removed from any form of affection or genuine concern for his son's life. "I saw the boy a few times," said one of the old servants, looking uncomfortably at the officers. "Always in silence, always alone. Mrs. Helena is distant, and Donato, well, he isn't one to show emotions." As the interviews continued, the officers began to notice a pattern. All the accounts of Lucas's life in the mansion were similar. He had no friends, barely left the house, and when he did, he seemed to walk the streets with a vacant look, as if the world around him didn't affect him. His meals were sparse, and the toys children his age usually had, Lucas never saw. He lived as if he were a shadow, constantly observing a life that was never his, surrounded by luxury, but never touching happiness. What caught the investigators' attention most, however, were the words of the servants, who described him as a prisoner. They spoke of him as if he were someone completely isolated, someone who could never have truly lived a normal childhood. They said that Lucas was a quiet boy, always still, always with his eyes lowered, as if he were in a constant state of apathy. None of them knew exactly why, but they all had the same feeling. Something was wrong. As the investigation progressed, something curious caught the attention of the lead officer, Roberto Araujo. He began asking deeper questions, not just about Lucas, but also about his parents. It was then that one of the older maids touched on the crucial point. Donato never wanted the child, she said, as if revealing a secret that had been kept for years. He was always very clear about that. When Helena got pregnant, he didn't want to know. It was just family and societal pressure. There was never love. Never. Roberto fell silent, watching the woman closely. This kind of revelation wasn't common, especially from someone who had served the family for so long. He knew this wasn't something she would say lightly, especially considering the fear everyone had of Donato. But what she said completely changed the course of the investigation. The officer then stepped back a little, thinking, if Donato never wanted Lucas, then what could have driven the boy to steal? It made no sense. There was no logical explanation for it. Not when you have everything, or at least that's what people think. And it was at that moment that the police began investigating not only Lucas's life, but also Donato's. They discovered that, despite all the success and power, Donato had something hidden in his past, something that didn't reflect in his impersonal and calculating behavior. No one knew this, but Donato's story began to show a tragic resemblance to his own son's. Donato, though a man with a solid facade, carried a weight. He wasn't just a successful businessman. He'd grown up in a home of neglect and abuse. His mother, a harsh and cruel woman, never wanted him. His father, absent and indifferent, left him to fend for himself from the earliest years of his life. What Donato experienced in his childhood wasn't just a lack of affection, it was a deep void, a constant sense of abandonment. Donato's story wasn't a surprise to those who knew him well, but few understood the impact his childhood had on his view of the world. He'd never known what true affection was, and this transformed him into a closed-off, calculating man with no room for love or feelings. What the police were discovering now was more than just a simple family issue. It was a chain of trauma passed down from generation to generation. The most ironic part of it all was that by trying to offer Lucas a life of luxury and comfort, Donato was, in a way, repeating what he had lived, a son being neglected in a world where love and care were non-existent. What Donato didn't know, and what no one knew until then, was that his son didn't want expensive toys or brand-name clothes. Lucas wanted what he had never had: attention, affection, and a real home. As the police continued to dig deeper, one thing became clear. Lucas's case wasn't just about a simple theft, but about a reflection of a much darker family history than anyone could have imagined. Donna Lucia was an elderly woman, but her eyes still carried an unusual energy. Though life had been tough on her, she never allowed it to turn her into someone bitter or indifferent. On the contrary, she always believed that loss and pain could somehow be overcome by love. And it was love that she felt immediately for Lucas, the 10-year-old boy, when she saw him for the first time in the city center. Lucas was lying on a bench in a square, his eyes vacant, as if he were in a completely different world from the one around him. The city rushed by him, but he didn't seem the least bit interested. The cold of that afternoon didn't seem to bother him. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, unmoving. Donna Lucia, who always enjoyed walking there after her afternoon coffee, noticed him right away, not for his appearance, but for the lost and distant look he carried. "Are you okay, my son?" she asked gently, approaching him. Lucas, initially startled, looked at the woman with distrust, but something in the softness of her voice made him relax a little. He didn't know why, but there was something about her that seemed comforting. I'm fine," he replied, his voice low, almost inaudible. Donna Lucia sat beside him, not rushing to leave. For a while she simply observed, allowing him to feel comfortable enough to speak when he wanted. And, like a leaf slowly falling from a tree, Lucas finally broke the silence. I didn't want to be born," he said, staring at the ground. These words, spoken so simply, deeply moved Donna Lucia. She knew something was terribly wrong, that there was more to this boy's story than a simple prank. "My dear, it's not your fault. You're not to blame for anything," said Donna Lucia, gently stroking his head. "I know it must be hard, but know that you deserve to be happy, and I can help." Those simple words, spoken by a woman who had suffered so much in her life, had an unexpected effect on Lucas. For the first time in a long time, he felt something that resembled relief. He wasn't alone. In the following days, Donna Lucia began to spend more time with Lucas. She knew he was being watched, surveilled by the police, but she never pulled away. She understood what the boy was facing, a deep loneliness, a void that seemed impossible to fill. Donna Lucia, on the other hand, had also faced life's harsh losses. She had lost her husband, her children, everything she loved, and this had made her a stronger woman. But unlike Donato, she knew that pain could be overcome. that love could heal the deepest wounds. Lucas began to spend more time with Donna Lucia, first hesitantly, then with more confidence. He would accompany her on her walks through the city, and she would teach him to see the beauty in little things, like the flowers growing on the sidewalks or the animals playing in the park. Donna Lucia made him laugh, something he hadn't felt in years. She didn't treat him like a lost cause or a troubled boy. She saw him as a human being, with dreams, fears, and desires. To her, Lucas wasn't just Donato's son, a boy from a rich and powerful family. He was just Lucas, a boy who deserved a chance to be happy. However, reality soon knocked on the door. The investigators were getting closer to understanding what was happening inside Donato's mansion. The police had learned of some of the revelations made by the employees, and Lucas's life was starting to be analyzed more deeply. What had initially seemed like a simple investigation into a theft was turning into something much more complex and dark. Meanwhile, Donato himself, although maintaining the facade of an unbeatable man, began to feel the pressure of everything that was happening. The calls from the police, the news spreading throughout the city, the inquisitive looks from everyone. None of this was new to him, but the idea of losing control over his family's image consumed him. He couldn't admit, not even to himself, that perhaps he had failed his son. It was easier to blame Lucas, easier to see him as a failure, as a disgrace to the family. But something was changing, slowly, within Donato. Perhaps deep down, he knew that Lucas's story was a repetition of his own suffering. A part of him, though reluctant, was starting to feel something he had denied his whole life: guilt, and it tormented him more than any financial or business problem. Perhaps what he feared most was the fact that Lucas, unlike him, had found someone willing to love him, and that, to Donato, seemed like the greatest threat of all. Meanwhile, Lucas, under the care of Donna Lucia, was starting to discover what true affection was, something he had never known inside the Golden Mansion. And with that, the shy, closed boy began to open up, to smile, to find himself. Donato's mansion was silent on that winter morning. The biting wind made the trees sway, but inside the house everything was in order, or at least that's what it seemed. Helena, his wife, was sitting on the large sofa in the living room, absorbed in a book, her eyes focused on something she wasn't really paying attention to. Donato was in the office, as always, closing deals and signing contracts. The family's routine seemed untouched, but there was something in the air that made everything feel heavier. The police were closer to the truth than they realized. That day, Roberto Araujo, the lead detective in the investigation, was preparing to visit the mansion again. He felt that something was about to change. Something in Donato's behavior made him uneasy. It was as if he knew the curtain was about to fall, and with it, the truth would be exposed. "Helena," Donato said, entering the room with a tense look. "We need to talk." Helena didn't lift her eyes from the book. She knew the conversation ahead wouldn't be trivial, but she still chose to remain indifferent. "About what?" she asked, not taking her eyes off her reading. Donato approached her, his face marked by a weight Helena, in her coldness, rarely understood. "About Lucas," he replied, his voice a bit softer than usual. Helena finally lifted her eyes and stared at her husband. She knew the subject of their son had always been dangerous territory, but she never imagined a simple occurrence could force him out of his calculating stance. "What about Lucas?" she said, already sensing what was to come. "He was taken to the police station," Donato said, sitting in the chair opposite her. "The police are investigating. They'll find out everything." The words fell heavily on Helena, but she showed no signs of concern. Her expression remained unchanged, as always. "The police are investigating," she repeated, as if it were an irrelevant statement. "Let them investigate. They won't find anything." Donato watched her, trying to understand what was happening inside his own house. He knew that Helena's indifference wasn't just a lack of interest, but a defense. She didn't want to be touched by anything that involved Lucas. The truth was, since the moment she found out about the pregnancy, Helena had always looked at the boy with contempt. He wasn't a planned child, wasn't part of the future she dreamed of. Lucas had always been a bitter reminder of a mistake she never wanted to have made. It's not just that, Donato continued now with a firmer voice. The police are starting to understand what's going on here. The boy, Lucas, he's not okay, Helena, I feel it. Helena looked at him, a cold, distant smile forming on her lips. What do you want me to do, Donato? You know how it is. Lucas is a problem we never wanted. If he has some difficulty, let the police handle it. We have nothing more to do with him. Those words were like a stab to Donato's heart, but he showed no weakness. He knew that deep down, Helena's coldness had always been a reflection of his own inability to deal with emotions. Deep down, he didn't know how to deal with what was happening with Lucas, and the worst part was that he had no idea what to do to correct his own mistakes. Their conversation continued for a few more minutes, but with no conclusion. Neither of them was willing to admit that their neglect of their son had reached an irreversible point. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Lucas's life was beginning to change, even though he didn't know it. Donna Lucia had become his refuge, a safe harbor where he could finally breathe without feeling trapped in a golden cage. That same afternoon, Officer Roberto Araujo appeared at the mansion door. He was determined to confront Donato and Helena, but he knew that the greatest obstacle would be their coldness. When Roberto was received at the entrance, he noticed the tense atmosphere that hung over the house. "We need to talk," he said, in a deep voice. "It's about Lucas." Donato looked at him with suspicion, but didn't object. He knew the investigation was becoming inevitable. He wanted it to end soon, but something inside him told him that this wasn't over yet, that the truth at some point would come to light. Lucas was seen with Donna Lucia, the officer informed. An elderly woman who seems to have become attached to him. We're starting to understand that the boy's situation at home is not as simple as it seemed. The mention of Donna Lucia made Donato's face twitch slightly. He knew that if Lucas began to find refuge in the arms of someone else, his situation would become even more complicated. The control he had over his son's life was starting to slip away, and he didn't like it one bit. "She's nobody important," Donato said, trying to hide his nervousness. "If the boy wants to cling to her, let him. But he doesn't leave the house. No decision of his will be made without my permission." Roberto looked at him, his piercing eyes trying to read the mind of the businessman. "You're wrong, Donato," he said calmly. "What you don't understand is that Lucas doesn't want your permission. He's starting to see what true love is, something you, apparently, never knew how to give." Enraged, Donato clenched his fists, but before he could respond, Roberto turned and left, leaving him with a feeling of loss, a sense that something irreparable was happening in his life. Donato had always liked to control everything around him, his businesses, the image of his family, even the way people saw him in the city. He was a man of power, and power meant control. But there was one thing he could never control, a wound he never wanted to face, his own past. That rainy morning after Officer Roberto's visit, Donato found himself lost in his thoughts, alone in his office. He was no longer interested in numbers or contracts. His mind was focused on something much deeper, something he would rather keep buried forever. He knew he was about to lose control over Lucas, and that terrified him. But there was something more, something he was trying to avoid at all costs, the truth about his own childhood. The office door opened and Helena entered, interrupting the silence. She wasn't there by chance. She knew Donato was lost in his own thoughts. "You're thinking about the boy, aren't you?" she asked, looking at her husband with a cold but curious tone. Donato didn't respond immediately. He was immersed in his memories, recollections he would rather not relive. He stood up and walked to the window, watching the rain beat against the glass. "It's strange, Helena," he said, finally breaking the silence. "Lucas, he reminds me so much of myself." Helena frowned, surprised by Donato's words. She wasn't used to hearing such reflections from him. He, who always seemed so impassive, was now allowing himself to look at his own reflection in a way she had never imagined. "What do you mean?" she asked, not hiding her disbelief. Donato took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts before speaking. He knew that talking about what happened to him as a child was like opening a wound that had never healed. But something inside him forced him to continue. "My mother," he said, his voice barely audible. "She never wanted to have me. I was a mistake, something that made her feel ashamed. My father, an absent man, was never there. I grew up alone, fighting to survive, while my mother despised me." Helena looked at him, not knowing what to say. She had never known the truth about Donato's childhood. He had always been the successful man, the unbeatable businessman. She never imagined that he too carried the scars of a life marked by neglect and abandonment. "I've always felt like I was nothing, Helena," Donato continued, his face now marked by a look of pain she rarely saw. "I was never loved. I was never wanted. And now, seeing what's happening with Lucas, I see how much he's like me, how much he too grew up without love." Helena fell silent for a moment, absorbing her husband's words. She had always known Donato was tough, calculating, but she had never imagined the weight he carried. She didn't know how to react. Part of her felt pity for him, but another part couldn't understand how he had let everything get to this point with Lucas. "So you're saying it's our fault?" Helena asked, her tone laced with contempt. "That he's like this because of us? I don't believe that, Donato. He's just a troubled boy. We're not to blame." Donato looked at her, his eyes empty of emotion. He didn't know what he wanted to hear, but he knew that Helena's indifference was only making things worse. He had spent his whole life trying to escape his own suffering, building an empire, becoming someone important. But none of that meant anything in the face of the truth about his past and the impact it had on his son. "Maybe we're not the only ones to blame," he replied, with bitterness that made his voice tremble. "But I know that Lucas doesn't deserve what we're doing to him. He doesn't deserve to be treated the way I was treated." And at that moment, Donato realized something even more devastating. He didn't know how to fix what he had done to Lucas. He didn't know how to give his son the love he had never received. It was too late, and it consumed him from within. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Lucas was beginning to realize that something was changing in his life. Donna Lucia, with her unwavering kindness, was creating an environment where he could finally be a child. He was starting to trust her in a way he had never trusted anyone. Donna Lucia took him to school, fed him with care, and most importantly, offered him something he never knew existed: affection. Lucas felt that although things were still difficult, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. He knew his life wouldn't be the same anymore. But a part of him still wondered, what about his father? What about his mother? Would he ever get what he deserved from them? Donna Lucia's house was small but full of life, not because of material things, but because of the energy she put into every corner, every gesture. The simple furniture and the smell of fresh coffee in the air were a foundation of comfort that Lucas had never known. For the first time in his life, he felt that someone cared about him, not because he was the son of a rich businessman, but because he was Lucas, a boy who deserved love. That afternoon, Donna Lucia took him to the small backyard at the back of the house. There, She tended to a few plants, and the small garden was her pride. But unlike many adults who saw plants as just a way to occupy time, Donna Lucia had something different in mind. She used the garden as a metaphor for life. Caring for the plants was her way of teaching Lucas about patience, love, and most importantly, about the possibility of transformation. "You know, Lucas," she said as she watered a flower bed, "every seed you plant needs time, water, and sunlight to grow. Nothing happens immediately, but if you take care of it, it will bloom." Lucas, who had never had anyone to teach him lessons like this, looked at Donna Lucia with wide, attentive eyes, absorbing every word as if it were a treasure. He was starting to understand what she meant, but there was still something that bothered him. He couldn't stop thinking about his previous life, in the dark, cold mansion where he had never truly felt at home. "What if I'm not good enough?" he asked, his voice low, as if he were wondering aloud what he felt deep down. Donna Lucia stopped watering the plants and knelt next to Lucas, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Lucas, my dear," she said with a warm smile, "you don't have to be perfect. You just need to be yourself. What matters is that you're here now. I'm here for you." These words touched something deep within the boy, something he had never known was missing. The feeling of belonging to someone. He wanted to believe that he could indeed have a different life. He wanted to believe he deserved to be loved. And Donna Lucia was becoming the beacon he had been searching for. As the day passed, their friendship grew stronger. Donna Lucia taught him how to make a clay doll, a simple activity, but one that made Lucas smile for the first time in a long time. He, who had never known what to do with his free time, was now learning to have fun, to feel joy in the simplest things in life. However, while Lucas was living these moments of rediscovery, the situation in Donato's mansion was becoming more and more tense. The police had deepened their investigation, and all signs pointed to the fact that the neglect of Lucas was not an isolated incident. Donato and Helena's behavior was beginning to be questioned. That same day, Officer Roberto Araujo, determined to uncover the truth, returned to Donato's house. This time, Donato was expecting him. The businessman knew that the situation was about to slip out of his control. He was no longer so sure of his authority over Lucas, and knew that the investigation was moving quickly. Roberto's face was serious, and Donato knew the police already had enough information to expose the truth about the Barrows household. "I need you to tell me what's going on, Donato," Roberto said, getting straight to the point. "We can't ignore what's happening with Lucas. He's being neglected, and this needs to be addressed." Donato looked at the officer, his gaze hardened, trying to maintain control, but a wave of worry flooded him. For the first time, he felt that he was facing something he couldn't manipulate. Even with all his wealth, he couldn't erase the mistakes of the past, and he knew the police were very close to discovering everything. "I can't let this continue, Donato," Roberto continued. "I'm starting to understand what happened in your house. And believe me, we won't stop until this is resolved." Donato, not knowing what to say, remained silent. He already knew he couldn't hide the truth forever. The mask of the unbeatable businessman was beginning to crack, and finally, the weight of guilt and responsibility started to surface. Meanwhile, in his small house, Lucas was far from this confusion. He didn't know that his life was about to take a different turn. He was simply living, smiling, making the clay doll with Donna Lucia, and believing for the first time that he had the right to be happy. Donato's house was silent, but it wasn't a comfortable silence. The tension hung in the air, thicker than the fog that covered the city on that cold morning. Donato felt the weight of his own choices like an anchor, slowly sinking him. He never imagined his life would take this turn. He never imagined he would have to face his own failure as a father. But now, with the police investigation getting closer to the truth, he couldn't escape anymore. Roberto's visit had deeply shaken him. For the first time, Donato found himself forced to think about who he really was and what he was doing to his son. When the police began questioning the neighbors and employees, the truth about the oppressive environment Lucas lived in started to emerge. Comments about his poor diet, his loneliness, the punishments he suffered. All of this could no longer be ignored. The powerful man who controlled the city no longer had control over his own home. And that troubled him. That morning, as the rain hit the mansion windows, Donato sat alone in his office, his mind troubled. He didn't know how to approach Lucas. He knew he had pushed him away, but now he felt something was breaking inside him. He didn't want to lose his son, but at the same time, he didn't know what to do to fix what had been destroyed. The office door opened softly and Helena entered. She wasn't there to comfort him. In fact, it was the opposite. She had always been distant, but in that moment, the expression on her face showed a certain weariness. She already knew the situation was beyond any control they had. "You're thinking about the boy, aren't you?" she said, her cold eyes fixed on Donato. "I've already said we have nothing to do with this. He's always been a problem." Donato looked at her but didn't respond. He was absorbed in his own thoughts. Helena, as always, showed no empathy. To her, Lucas had always been a burden, an inconvenience she never wanted to carry. "It's not about what he did, Helena. It's not about who he is. It's about what I did, what we did," Donato said, his voice lower than he intended. Helena raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her husband's fragility. She was used to his strong, unbeatable demeanor, but there he was different, vulnerable. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, still not understanding. Donato stood up from his chair, walked over to the window, and looked out at the relentless rain. His mind was full of memories, painful memories of his own childhood. He remembered his mother, her contempt, his loneliness. He remembered how he himself had distanced himself from his parents, as if he had distanced himself from everything in order to survive. "I was raised in a place like that," he said, pointing to the window as if the mansion was a reflection of the house where he had grown up. "But I had hope, Helena. I had hope things would be different. I didn't want to be my father. I didn't want to be my mother. But I ended up becoming the same thing." Helena remained silent, unsure of what to say. She had never seen Donato so broken, so exposed. To her, business had always been the priority. She never knew how to treat a child, never knew how to give him what he really needed. "And now?" she finally asked, almost cynically. "What do you plan to do? Do you think you can just fix everything now?" Donato looked at her, a deep sadness on his face. "I need to do what's right," he said, with a determination she wasn't used to seeing in him. "Lucas deserves something more. He deserves more than I could ever give. He deserves to be loved." Donato's words were like a confession, and in that moment, he knew he had to do something to correct his mistakes, but he didn't know how. He knew the first thing he needed to do was find Lucas, but would the boy accept him back? Meanwhile, at Donna Lucia's house, Lucas began to feel a comfort he had never imagined possible. Donna Lucia's kindness was shaping his view of the world. He, who once looked at life as dark and purposeless, now saw a new possibility. Donna Lucia made him understand that happiness didn't come from material things, but from the gestures of love and care that he was now receiving. As much as Lucas was beginning to find his place, a part of him still wondered if he could really leave behind his family, the mansion, his parents, and everything he had known. He didn't know how he could live without them, even though he knew he had never truly been part of that family. Donato felt a storm inside him. The decision was made. He had to find Lucas, apologize, and somehow fix the destruction he had caused in his son's life. But, as the moment approached, he couldn't ignore the fear that took over him. What if it was too late? He knew the way he had treated Lucas might be irreparable. Still, a part of him was willing to try. It was a cold, grey afternoon when Donato finally headed to Donna Lucia's house. The path there seemed longer than usual. He passed street after street, but his mind was so agitated that everything seemed blurred. Even with the success he had achieved in business, he had never faced something so intimately personal. Did Lucas want to see him? When he arrived at Donna Lucia's small house, he hesitated for a moment at the door. He heard the soft sound of laughter from inside, a simple, warm melody that contrasted with the emptiness he felt inside. But the pain of losing his son made him take the final step and knock. Donna Lucia, who was in the kitchen preparing tea, heard the knock and momentarily tensed. She knew who Donato was. She had seen him before, on the rare occasions when he would stop by the house to leave something for Lucas, always hurried and indifferent. But now he was there, at the door, as someone who truly needed something. She opened the door slowly, staring at him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "What do you want here, Donato?" she asked without preamble. Donato swallowed hard, unsure of what to say immediately. The woman in front of him was no ordinary person. Donna Lucia was not one of the many who bowed to him because of his wealth. She, in fact, represented everything he had failed to be as a father. Her kindness and patience made him feel even more guilty. I came to see Lucas," Donato said, his voice weaker than he expected. "I need to talk to him." Donna Lucia observed him for a moment, assessing the sincerity in his eyes. She already knew what he had done, but she also understood that no one could change what had happened in the past. What truly mattered now was what Donato was willing to do in the present. "Lucas is not an object, Donato," she replied calmly but firmly. "You can't just show up when it's convenient for you." Donato remained silent, the weight of her words hitting him hard. But he didn't back down. He knew he had no right to demand forgiveness, but he was willing to fight for a chance. Was that all he had? A chance to be better. I know I failed, and I know I have no right to ask for anything," he said, his eyes now a bit firmer, "but I need Lucas to know that I'm sorry, and more importantly, I need him to know that no matter what happened, he is my son. He will always be my son." Donna Lucia watched him for a few more seconds, then, with a gesture, motioned for him to come in. She knew that, no matter how difficult Donato was to deal with, he was asking for something genuine. She didn't know if Lucas was ready for this confrontation, but she also knew that it was time for him to face the choices Donato had made. Inside the house, Lucas was in the living room, lying on the rug, fiddling with some toys Donna Lucia had given him. He looked up when the door opened and saw his father walk in, with a different look on his face, darker and more vulnerable than he had ever imagined. The tension in the room was palpable. Lucas didn't know what to do with that presence. He didn't know how to react to the man who had never truly been a father to him. Donato took a step toward Lucas, but stopped, as if the distance between them was much more than just physical meters. The boy looked at him with a mix of confusion and anger. What did he want there? Where was the love he should have received? "Lucas," Donato began, his voice hesitant, "I know I wasn't the father you deserved. I never knew how to be. And I know I can't erase what happened, but I want you to know that I'm sorry." A silence lingered for a few seconds. Lucas looked at Donna Lucia, seeking some kind of guidance, but she just watched him, respecting the moment. It was Lucas who needed to decide what to do. The boy then slowly stood up and, keeping his eyes fixed on Donato, said simply, "You treated me like I was nothing, like I was invisible. What do you want now?" Donato felt a blow to his chest, but he didn't look away. He knew he deserved those harsh words, and he accepted them because he knew there was no easy way to fix the damage he had caused. "I want Lucas. I want you to give me a chance to be a real father, Donato said, his voice softer. If you'll let me, I want to try. I want to make things right. I don't know how, but I want to learn. Lucas looked at him in silence, and for a moment the weight of the words hung in the air. He wanted to believe, but he didn't know if he could forgive. He didn't know if he could trust someone who had always ignored him. He looked at Donna Lucia, who gave him a subtle smile, as if telling him that he had the right to choose his own path. Lucas finally took a deep breath, and with a movement that made Donato's heart race, he stepped away from his father and walked toward Donna Lucia's room. I'm not ready, he said, not looking back. Donato stood there, frozen, feeling Lucas's words echo louder than any scream. He knew he had lost something very important, and perhaps that was the greatest loss of all. The next day was marked by an unsettling quiet. Donna Lucia prepared breakfast as usual, with a calm smile, but the weight of the words exchanged the night before still hung over the house. Lucas was silent, sitting at the table, stirring his spoon in his plate without really eating. He wasn't hungry. What he felt at that moment was something much deeper and more confusing. He had lain in bed the night before with a knot in his throat. He didn't know what to do. Donato, the man who had given him life, had finally said he was sorry, but the words sounded empty, as if they were too distant from the pain he carried. Lucas knew his father was trying in some way to change, but the reality was different. The man who had abandoned him for so many years wasn't someone he could just accept back. Donna Lucia came into the room and sat next to Lucas, noticing that he was distant. She knew the boy was still dealing with his emotions, with his own doubts. She also knew he would need time to process everything that had happened. But she also knew that, as always, she was there for him, ready to help him make the best decision. "Are you okay, my son?" she asked gently, touching his hand. "If you want to talk, I'm here." Lucas looked up at her. Donna Lucia was the only person who gave him what he had always needed: affection, patience, understanding. She wasn't just a friend or a caregiver. She was a second mother. And somehow she knew what was going on in his heart. I don't know what to do, Donna Lucia," Lucas replied, his voice trembling. "My dad, he's trying. He told me he's sorry, but I don't know if I can believe him." Donna Lucia smiled, though her heart ached hearing Lucas's words. She knew the boy was caught in a web of conflicting emotions. He had every right to doubt Donato, to doubt love itself. "I know it's hard, my dear," she said, gently stroking his hair, "but sometimes forgiveness doesn't mean everything will be as it was before. Sometimes it's a way of giving yourself the freedom to move on, to choose what really matters." Lucas looked at her, absorbing her words. He knew she was right. But how could he do it? How could he choose? Donato was his father. He should at least try to reconnect, right? But on the other hand, Donna Lucia offered him something much more valuable: the chance to be happy, to be treated with care, something he had never experienced before. Donna Lucia never treated him like a burden, never ignored him. She embraced him, made him feel loved. It was hard, but Lucas knew the decision was in his hands. He would need to choose between staying in the shadow of a man who had never loved him or moving forward, in search of a life where affection was the center of everything. As he reflected, something inside him opened. The image of his father, which he had carried inside him, slowly began to fade. The image of Donato as a hero, as someone who could protect and guide, was breaking. And in its place, a new idea emerged. True love did not come from money or status. He felt he deserved more. He deserved the chance to live a different way. In the late afternoon, Donato returned to Donna Lucia's house, now calmer, but with a heavy heart. He knew that Lucas had made a decision, and when he entered the room, he found the boy sitting at the window, looking outside as if he were waiting for something. "Lucas," Donato said, trying not to sound desperate, "I understand you need time, but—" Lucas slowly turned around and his eyes were determined. There was a strength in them, a strength Donato had never seen before. It was the strength of someone who finally was ready to choose their own path, regardless of everything. "I don't want to stay with you anymore, Dad," Lucas said, his words clear and firm. I can't trust you, not now." Donato felt as if struck by lightning. He had been expecting this conversation, but the pain of hearing those words left him paralyzed. He wanted to say something, explain, apologize, but nothing felt right. He knew that what was happening at that moment was irreversible. Lucas, noticing the expression of pain on his father's face, didn't feel vindicated, just sad. It was a deep and quiet sadness, but also a sense of freedom. He knew he was doing what was right for him. "I'm going to stay with Donna Lucia," Lucas said, his voice now softer but without doubt. "She gives me everything I need. She treats me with love." Donato stared at him speechless, not knowing what to do with his own guilt. He knew this moment could be the last chance for reconciliation between them, but he no longer had the right to ask. He had failed as a father. "I understand," he said finally, his voice rough. "I don't know how to apologize, Lucas, but if you ever change your mind, I'll be here." Lucas didn't respond. He simply looked at him one last time before turning his gaze back to the window. Donato stood there, frozen, staring at Lucas and feeling a tremendous pain grow inside him. His son's words were still echoing in his mind. "I'm going to stay with Donna Lucia." But deep down, he knew the boy was doing what was right for himself. Donato had failed, and the only thing he could do now was accept Lucas's decision. He took a step back, hesitated, but said nothing more. The words of regret he wanted to say no longer held any value. He knew he was no longer a father, not in the way Lucas needed, and realizing this, a feeling of emptiness consumed him. He turned and left Donna Lucia's house without looking back. Inside the house, Lucas felt a strange relief. As difficult as it was to walk away from his father, he was now free from a relationship that had never existed the way he imagined. The love and care he had always sought weren't in Donato's wealth or in his cold, distant presence. They were in Donna Lucia, a woman who treated him as her own son, expecting nothing in return. It was there, in that simple house, that he finally felt at home. Meanwhile, Donato left, aimlessly. He thought about the years he had spent absent, the opportunities he had lost, how his life of wealth and success meant nothing compared to the lack of love and true connection with his son. He knew nothing he did could erase the damage caused, but he also knew that at least he had been honest with himself now. He was no longer the powerful man everyone admired. He was simply a regretful man. Lucas was in Donna Lucia's garden, watching the flowers she loved to care for. The cool afternoon air brushed against his face, and he felt a peace he had never known. He sat next to Donna Lucia, who looked at him with a gentle smile. "How are you feeling, my dear?" Donna Lucia asked with serene calmness. Lucas looked at her, feeling an immense gratitude for everything she had done for him. He knew that the pain of his father was still inside him, but the love he felt for Donna Lucia was greater. She had shown him what it meant to be truly loved, without expectations or cruelty. "I'm okay, Donna Lucia," he replied, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I've finally understood what true happiness is." Donna Lucia gently held his hand. She knew this moment wasn't just Lucas's decision for a better life, but the opening of a new chapter for both of them. She had lost a lot over the years, but in a way, Taking care of Lucas made her feel renewed. He was her opportunity for healing, for redemption. "You deserve to be happy, Lucas," said Donna Lucia, smiling lovingly. "Now you have the chance to create your own story, a story where love and care are the protagonists." Lucas smiled, and the weight he had carried seemed to gradually lift. He knew his journey was far from easy, but for the first time in his life, he felt ready for it. He had a new family now, not the one blood had imposed, but the one his heart had chosen. Weeks later, Lucas was at a park near Donna Lucia's house, playing with other boys. For the first time, he felt the freedom of being a child. He laughed, ran, played with the others, and didn't think about anything other than having fun. It was as if the weight of his previous life had been lifted from his shoulders. Meanwhile, Donato still hadn't found peace. He tried to get involved with other businesses, other people, but something was missing. He knew he couldn't replace the love he had never given his son. Wealth and loneliness were his only companions now. And he didn't know how to change that. He wondered if Lucas would ever look for him again. But deep down, he knew he had closed that door himself. Time passed and Lucas continued his new life, surrounded by Donna Lucia's love. Though the past couldn't be erased, he no longer had to carry it. He had found his true family, a family made of affection, care, and most importantly, free choices. Donato, in turn, continued his life, hoping that someday, somehow, the cycle of pain and separation could be broken. But for now, he could only watch from afar, unable to change what had already been done. Lucas, lying in Donna Lucia's bed, looked out the window and saw the starry sky. He smiled to himself. He had found peace. He knew that true happiness wasn't in what he had or what he lost, but in the love he now had to give and receive. The story of Lucas and Donato had come to an end, but the story of Lucas and Donna Lucia was just beginning. And thus ends the moving story of Lucas and his quest for true love, away from the coldness of his own family. A journey of pain, overcoming, and finally choice. He found peace with Donna Lucia, who gave him the opportunity to be happy, something he never had with his father, Donato. A story that shows us that sometimes true love doesn't come from blood or wealth, but from the ones who truly care for us and make us feel complete. And you, what do you think about Lucas's choice? Do you think he made the right decision by staying with Donna Lucia? Do you think that deep down, Donato really had the ability to change? Or do you believe that their past was too great to allow any reconciliation? I want to know your opinion. If you like this story and want more content like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell to not miss any chapter of our stories. Leave your comment below. What are your thoughts on Lucas's decision? Do you think in the end, love always prevails? Or is it something harder to find? See you in the next video.